another At History Gems, and this week, legends aren't history. Let's look at the two most famous legends of English or British history. They are Robin Hood and King Arthur. Yes, it's Robin Hood, or Robin Hood, or Robin Hood. Look, let's face it, the guy didn't actually exist, so we don't have any images of him. What's interesting about Robin Hood is the established legend with Prince John and all the taxes and Richard the Lionheart, etc., etc. All that came much later. The very first legends about Robin placed it at the time of Edward I's reign, not Richard I's. Then there's King Arthur, made famous from the Morte d'Arthur, written by Thomas Malory in the 15th century, compiling French legends about the king from the 14th century, but the king himself was probably 6th century. When I was at university back in the 1990s, there was quite a lot of excitement that the final piece of evidence that was potentially contemporary to King Arthur was proven conclusively not to be. So in other words, there are hundreds of years between, allegedly, this guy called King Arthur and the first appearances of him in things like Welsh poetry. So it's unlikely he actually existed. But this is where things get really interesting. This is where people try and shoehorn facts into the legend. There seems to be some vague evidence that there could have been a cavalry officer called Artorius, who might have lived in southern England, who might have fought the Saxons and organised some kind of resistance. But notice how many times I just said might there. The fact is, let's say there was. Let's say there was this cavalry officer called Artorius. Well, that's not quite the same thing as Arthur. It doesn't mean that there was a Guinevere, a Lancelot, there certainly wasn't a Camelot, no castles, because they came a lot later, no knights, no Holy Grail, and basically we are so far away from what your idea of King Arthur is to what might have possibly happened that it's not helpful. Probably the most compelling proof that King Arthur just didn't exist is courtesy of the Venerable Bede writing in the early 8th century AD. He wrote the Ecclesiastical History of the English, and while he got many things wrong, somebody like Arthur would have featured fairly heavily. However, it's quite telling that Bede doesn't mention him at all. Of course, you can start saying, well, if you're talking about legends, you might also talk about other things like religious texts as well. But you know what? I'm not going there. Wars have been started for lesser things, okay? But I think it's very interesting. We get a powerful story and we want it to be true. But that doesn't mean it really was. I think ultimately legends can be a reflection of the time that they were written down, and they're certainly a reflection of the human condition. Unfortunately, they're not really a reflection of the time and places that they're actually trying to pretend to come from. And on that note, I think it's a good point for you to consider the difference between fact, fiction, truth, legend. Thanks for watching, and as always, if you like this, there's always more on Twitter and on Facebook. Just type in @HistoryGems into both. See you soon.